What is up, YouTube? What you see on the screen is the final decisions of my tier list for this video. So if you came just to see the tier list, there it is. But if you want to hear my reasoning and explanations, I'm about to give you that. This is solely a tier list for how characters are in the Illusory Tower. Keep that in mind. In other modes, the characters might have like a different ranking, but in this, as a person who has reached floor 45 and is completely free to play, doesn't have domain Megumi, this is my opinion. At the top of SS tier is the characters which are either going to be your main DPS for the tower floors or your main supports. You can see obvious characters like Blue Gojo, who is the strongest blue DPS, Green Gojo, who is the strongest green DPS, Red Yuta, who is the strongest red DPS, and not only that, but he has one of the best healing passives in the game. Like, he can help your team sustain. Hanami, who is... I personally only used him on floors 38, 39, and 43, but I believe you can use him in earlier floors, and I might do some videos on showing that. Because Hanami's skill 3 and skill 4 are actually one of the best ways to reduce enemy damage, which helps you cheese the tower in not taking any damage. Especially when combined with other people from the SS tier, but we'll talk about them once we reach them. Also keep in mind that this order doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, Blue Gojo is better than Green Gojo. I have just put SS tier characters in a random order, S tier characters random, like, if they're more to the left or to the right, it doesn't mean they're better or worse. Next is Domain Megumi, which I personally don't have, but from reading his skills and seeing how people use him in tower, I believe he is one of the top tier supports and at the same time DPS, so he is something like a hybrid. He's not the best of the best, like definitely his personal damage is weaker than Nobara's personal damage. His support capabilities are, I believe, weaker than Hanami's support capabilities, but in the middle of like how good his DPS and how good his support is, he is the best hybrid. SSR Momo is literally the best short-term buffer, so you usually put her in the back line so she comes out after one of your units dies. And that way, just in 2 turns, you have her maximum buffs, which are bigger than any other character's buffs in 2 turns. However, there is our best support, Yaga, who is the best long-term support, because he can stack up to 4 turns of buffs, which makes him, in total, give a bigger boost than Momo, but he can't like do it in just 2 turns. You need 3 turns of setup, and then on the actual turn, you have to also use his skill. That's why he's also in the SS tier. After that is Inumaki, who, in my opinion, our Inumaki is the GOAT of the tower. You should be bringing him in 90% of higher tier floors, because higher floors deal way too much damage. By using his ward off, you guarantee survival. By stacking it twice, you guarantee taking almost 0 damage. Like, if you level 10 his ward off, it's 43%. You double stack it, it becomes 86% of damage reduction. Couple that with Hanami, and you have complete immunity to damage that isn't like poison, burn, and stuff like that. But, obviously, you can't infinitely spam their abilities. So that's where our other GOAT comes out, our Yuki. Throughout my journey in tower, our Inumaki, our Yuki, Yaga, and Blue Gojo have been my biggest carries. Green Gojo when I need a green floor, Yuta when I need a red floor, and for anything else I just use Nobara, because sadly there is currently no stronger yellow DPS than Nobara, but her DPS is not ideal. But yes, our Inumaki is the cursed energy battery. He is your answer to, oh no, I can't use Inumaki's skill enough times to be actually immune to damage. So if you couple him like our Yuki, our Inumaki, and Hanami, you can literally become immune. But there's a catch. After floor 40, each floor has this additional rule that if they survive for 40 turns, they gain 3000 cursed energy and physical technique buff. So even if you have a 100% damage reduction, with that buff, they can just completely annihilate your team in one shot. So the strategy of Hanami, Aryuki, and Arinumaki can only work if your DPS is strong enough to kill the enemies within 40 turns. Keep that in mind. But that is only for floors above 40, including 40. Next off is SR Momo, who she's basically the same power of buff as SSR Momo, because I personally in the tower have always used Momo skill 2, never used skill 3. And that is the main difference between SR Momo and SSR Momo. The thing is, SSR Momo gives you the buff for 2 turns with no limitation to use of skill. Meanwhile, SR Momo gives you the buff for 1 attack. So if you only want to buff the nuke, SR Momo and SSR Momo have the exact same buff, except like SSR Momo gives a bit of extra break, which doesn't matter on most floors. But if you want your attack after the nuke to also be buffed, SR Momo is better. But still, they're almost the exact same level of usefulness in tower. So in any floor that I personally used SSR Momo, you can use SR Momo and it will be almost the same. Next off is the S tier. Why are people in the S tier? Because there is either someone better than them, like who does their job better, or they just can't like squeeze out enough damage to deserve the higher tier. For example, Nanami, you could argue that he is SS tier, but when there's Yaga in the mix, you can't really, like, for sure Yaga is better than Nanami, but because there is no other buffer as good as Yaga and Nanami, like because they have a 4-turn buff, basically Nanami is kind of SS tier, but also not, like he's in the middle between S and SS tier. There are some floors where you would bring both Yaga and Nanami because you need maximum buffs, but again, I believe he deserves to be in the middle. I don't think he's that much SS tier because his buff is less than Yaga's, but he is also the second best damage over time buffer after Yaga. After that, Nobara is the best yellow DPS currently in the game, and that is kind of because she can Black Flash on her ultimate. Without the Black Flash on her ultimate, I think they're actually kind of even, like with Domain Megumi, somewhat even. So she is a bit weaker and stronger at the same time. Then again, I don't have him, so I might be a bit wrong, but that's my personal opinion. After that is Green Yuji, which is the best green DPS after Holo Purple. I have seen some people clear floor 21, 22 with him instead of Holo Purple, so that's good. I managed to beat 21 and 22 with Blue Gojo without him, but I believe that people have cleared even floor 23 with Yuji, so he deserves this spot. After that is Geto, who is the second best blue DPS after Blue Gojo. And not only is he a good DPS, but he also has one of the better single target buff skills. Like he can buff the damage by 30 something% of Jujutsu thingy, but you also need the extra cursed energy, which is why he is kind of not SS tier. Like I feel if he didn't have the cursed energy limitation, I would maybe put him in SS tier, and if they increase his damage a little bit. This one might be a little bit controversial, because a lot of people are like, oh my god, Junpei, he's trash, Junpei. Yeah, well, if you have ever read his skill 1, it's actually pretty much like very solid. Like I wanted to say god tier, but not exactly god tier because it's only Jujutsu damage nerf, but he is basically Hanami but weaker, because his skill 1 can 3-turn reduce enemy jujutsu damage. So if you have only one enemy, like a boss, which is a lot of the tower floors, his skill 1 will help you survive a lot of them. Not to mention his skill, I don't remember, was it 2 or 3, makes him taunt. Like, he attracts all attacks, which sadly doesn't work on AoE skills. So if you know that the boss has a single target skill, like a lot of them, he can actually nullify a turn of the enemy. So for tower, he is extremely solid. Then there is Red Yuji, who is, like, I again don't have him, just like I don't have Junpei and Geto and Itadori, so again, keep in mind that my opinion on these characters might not be the best. But I believe he is one of the next best DPS after Red Yuta for red units. I don't think there's any red unit except maybe Red Nobara, who can deal maybe more damage. But again, I don't have Red Nobara either. I'm just speculating based on the skills that I've read and my opinion on what they do. But again, like, his AoE team break buff could also be used for some floors, and that's why he gets such a high ranking in the tier list. Green Yuki, like, this tier of the decent tier is characters that I have not used in tower. I do not plan on using except for maybe for videos, but could maybe be used in tower. And why is that? Because he can AoE reduce the jujutsu damage taken, he can reduce a single target enemy's damage dealt, which makes him a pretty solid support, but sadly, it's not good enough in my opinion. And you always have the better option, which is Ryuki, who can do a lot better. You ironically would want to run him with Ryuki, but you can't, because he needs the extra cursed energy to spam his skill that makes your team take less jujutsu damage. So he is decent, but I wouldn't put him on my team, and I haven't. Again, with the glasses guy, he also has a pretty solid team damage reduction, but the number is sadly too low. Like, his damage reduction is better than Inumaki's in the way that it's for the entire turn. It doesn't have a limit of 2 times. But the number is basically 50% of Inumaki, so it's not good enough to help you survive some higher floors. And his ult gouge buff sadly doesn't help you get, like, any more ultimates. After that, there is Blue Megumi, who I had kind of high hopes because he helped me in domain investigation, but his damage is just way too low. Like, the best I've seen him do is like 300k, because in the strategies that I'm trying to make, I can't really bring too much buffers together with him. So in the best buff situation that I've made, he ends up doing like 300k damage with his ultimate. After that, his skills are enhanced, which again deal more damage, but it still feels a bit too low for me. Like, I don't see a situation in which you would ever bring him over Geto, for example. Same for Jogo. I haven't bought him yet, but from reading his skills, he is basically on the same tier as Megumi. Our SSR Inumaki also, like, sadly his passive seems like it's good, but it only triggers if there's like a single target kill. Like, if they wipe your entire team, he's not going to trigger. If it would trigger even if it's your entire team, then I would say he's like good enough. But now I would only bring him if I don't have Nobara, and I was actually thinking of trying to use him on some floors for some videos, and we'll see how that works out. Green Nanami is, sadly, he has like decent damage, but again, I believe he deals less damage than Green Yuji. He definitely deals a lot less damage than Hollow Purple Gojo. I've tried to use him on some floors, and sadly it doesn't work. Like, I wouldn't build him, to be honest. Red Nobara again has the same issues as the ones above, just weaker than Red Itadori, and as a whole, like, the reason why Yellow Nobara works is because she has a higher multiplier on the thing that triggers the nails, but this Nobara has it on skill 3, just like the Blue Nobara, so sadly, I believe you could use her, but I don't recommend that. And basically in B tier, I have put every character with a taunt, because you could use them for a sacrificial strategy, Like you bring them, you taunt, they die. You use the memory that buffs your team if they die. So I wouldn't recommend using them as anything other than a sacrifice. You might be wondering, well, he doesn't taunt. Well, he has the highest multiplier on a stun, so you could try to bring him as a sacrificial stunner. Like you stun the enemies, like one enemy because it's single target, and then he dies. So that's why he's here, because he had, like, I tried to use him, but he ended up useless for me, like for the floor that I was trying to. But you could find a floor on which you want to stun the enemy for 2 turns, then he dies and you get a buff. There's also like characters who have way too little damage, for example Maki. And in the bottom is the people who have absolutely no use. Like Todo has only 30% chance to land his disrupt, which is way too low. Like it will never land on a higher floor. And even if it lands, disrupt is a mechanic which there's just a specific percent of chance for it to trigger even after you apply it. So yeah, definitely don't use any of these. Well, I hope this helped you, and Merry Christmas to all of you. Bye bye.